What happens when the ocean itself becomes the battlefield? When every wave hides an enemy and every radio signal could be your death sentence. The Battle of the Atlantic was not a single fight. It was a 6-year nightmare fought in silence beneath the surface. These are the films historians call accurate. The ones that show what it truly meant to drown in fear and live by sonar. Number 15. The Cruel Sea. 1953. The Cruel Sea was never meant to glorify war. It was made to remind Britain what it cost. Based on Nicholas Montserrat's novel, it follows a Royal Navy corvette battling the relentless U-boat threat. The ocean itself is the real enemy. Cold, indifferent, infinite. The film stunned audiences because it did not stage heroics. It showed exhaustion, wet uniforms clinging to broken men, oil and seawater mixing with blood. Jack Hawkins gave a performance that captured command guilt perfectly. His Captain Erickson was haunted by choices that saved convoys but killed friends. There was no music of triumph, only the pulse of engines and the endless drone of the sea. The Admiralty at first resisted the production. They feared it revealed too much about anti-submarine tactics still classified at the time. But producers refused to soften it. Director Charles Friend shot in brutal weather and real North Atlantic conditions that nearly sank the set. Historians praise it for capturing convoy warfare exactly as it was. The boredom, the terror, the moral decay, the final shot of men staring at a horizon that never ends feels less like victory and more like survival's quiet curse. The Cruel Sea remains the most honest film ever made about men who fought a war they could not see. Number 14. Das Boot. 1981. Das Boot was not just a film, it was a descent. A slow, claustrophobic fall into madness. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen, it follows the crew of a German U-boat through the Atlantic campaign. No film before or since captured submarine warfare with such suffocating realism. It began as a controversial project. Some German veterans feared it would glorify the U-boat arm. Others feared it would vilify it. Petersen walked a dangerous middle line. He filmed inside a life-sized replica that was bolted to hydraulic rigs. Every tilt, every flood, every crash was real. Actors fainted under heat and pressure. The camera scraped walls because the set was that tight. Censors demanded edits when early viewers complained of sympathy toward the German side. But historians later defended it. Das Boot showed the war not as ideology but as endurance. The men were not monsters. They were trapped. Their world was diesel fumes, stale air, and the slow sound of water seeping through steel. The film became an international phenomenon. Critics hailed its authenticity. Submariners called it the closest thing to the real experience. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and preserved by historians as a cinematic document of naval warfare's hell. The final sequence when the crew returns home only to die in an air raid remains one of cinema's most devastating truths. War ends nothing. It only changes how death arrives. Number 13. The Enemy Below. 1957. The Enemy Below was a duel without hate, a battle between equals who respected the other's courage even as they tried to destroy each other. Robert Mitchum as the American destroyer captain and Kurt Jurgens as the German U-boat commander created a story less about nations and more about men bound by duty. It was praised as thrilling and surprisingly humane. The film avoided propaganda and showed mutual respect across the waves. Historians love it because its tactics and technology were precisely right. Depth charge patterns, radar tracking, and acoustic deception were depicted as they truly happened during the Atlantic War. The U-boat model sequences used miniature work so detailed that naval instructors later used them for training. Behind the camera, 20th Century Fox executives clashed over tone. Some wanted patriotic triumph, others wanted existential tension. Director Dick Powell fought for realism. He consulted actual destroyer veterans and staged maneuvers off California using Navy assistance. The sea storms were real, not effects. Actors endured dangerous conditions that mirrored combat strain. Upon release, critics were divided. Some felt it was too respectful of the enemy. Others praised its intelligence. But over time, it earned recognition for predicting the Cold War moral ambiguity soon to define cinema. By showing honor on both sides, it exposed the loneliness of command and the futility of hate. The enemy below ends not with cheers, but with a shared rescue at sea. Two enemies helping each other survive. It remains a film historians call emotionally accurate because it understands that in the Battle of the Atlantic, the true enemy was not each other. It was the ocean itself. Number 12. The Bedford Incident, 1965. The Bedford Incident is one of the most haunting Cold War naval films ever made. It hides its Atlantic setting behind fictional names, but historians say it captures the exact paranoia that defined anti-submarine warfare. Sidney Poitier plays a journalist aboard a destroyer commanded by Richard Widmark, whose obsession with a lurking Soviet submarine becomes a slow suicide mission. The movie begins quietly like a routine patrol, but soon turns into a psychological war of nerves. The crew lives in constant tension. Sleep vanishes. Every sonar ping echoes like a heartbeat. The lines between enemy contact and imagination blur until command decisions begin killing morale. Historians praise its precision in showing the stress of sonar tracking and the claustrophobic power chain aboard a destroyer. Behind the scenes, Widmark himself was shaken by the film's message. He reportedly told the director that the ending would terrify audiences too much. The studio fought over it. Columbia executives begged for a patriotic rewrite, but director James B. Harris refused. He kept the ending where one mistake annihilates everyone on board. The Navy distanced itself from the film, fearing the public might see it as anti-military. For historians, it remains chillingly authentic because it exposes how technology magnified fear. There are no grand battles, only mistakes magnified into apocalypse. The final silence after the detonation feels real because it is how the ocean swallows men and memory alike. Number 11. The Silent Enemy, 1958. The Silent Enemy told the story the world almost forgot. It follows Lieutenant Lionel Crabb, the Royal Navy diver whose real-life exploits inspired generations of frogmen. Set during the Mediterranean battles of the early Atlantic War, the film captures how divers fought unseen wars against enemy mines and sabotage. It is not a loud film. It is cold and methodical. Shot in real underwater locations near Gibraltar, the movie terrified insurance companies. Lead actor Lawrence Harvey insisted on performing much of the diving himself. The suits were real heavy gear from wartime stock. The air tanks failed repeatedly and one diver nearly drowned. Yet the result feels absolutely authentic. The underwater cinematography is not glamorous. It is slow, suffocating, and eerily quiet. Historians admire it because it revealed the forgotten front of the Battle of the Atlantic. The war was not only about ships and submarines, it was also about men who fought with knives underwater. The film even predicted later real-world controversies. In 1956, the real Lionel Crabb mysteriously disappeared on a secret mission near a visiting Soviet cruiser. The film was released 2 years later, and the Admiralty refused to comment on the connection. The Silent Enemy became part biography, part warning. It reminded audiences that heroism often drowns in secrecy. When the credits roll, the ocean looks peaceful again, but the viewer knows it hides the ghosts of men who fought without ever being seen. Number 10. Western Approaches, 1944. Western Approaches was not Hollywood fiction. It was the British government's own attempt to show the truth. Made during the war by the Ministry of Information, it was filmed using real sailors and real ships during active Atlantic patrols. There were no actors, only men playing themselves. The film follows the crew of a lifeboat after their ship is sunk by a U-boat. The tension is unbearable because every sound in the fog could mean survival or death. The Atlantic is filmed in vivid color using pioneering early Technicolor cameras. The waves are massive. The realism is absolute. There were no special effects. The sea nearly killed the production crew more than once. Censors at first refused to release it widely, fearing it would demoralize the public. The sailors looked starving and desperate, not heroic. But that is exactly why historians call it one of the most accurate depictions of the Battle of the Atlantic ever made. It captures exhaustion, cold hunger, and the terrifying uncertainty of waiting to be found. Behind the camera director, Pat Jackson endured mutiny from his non-professional cast. Real sailors hated reshooting takes and sometimes refused to repeat lines. Jackson persevered, knowing he was filming something historic. Decades later, historians restored it and screened it again to modern audiences who were stunned by its documentary precision. Western Approaches remains unique because it shows no clear victory, only endurance, the kind of quiet bravery that kept convoys alive long enough to turn the tide of war. Number 9. The Sea Chase. 1955. The Sea Chase is one of those films that blurred hero and villain until historians could no longer look away. John Wayne plays a German sea captain trying to escape Allied pursuit across the vast Atlantic after the outbreak of war. Critics were divided at first. Some thought it was fantasy, but naval historians later praised its chilling accuracy in depicting the loneliness and futility of commerce raiders hunted across oceans. What makes The Sea Chase remarkable is its refusal to paint war in black and white. Wayne's Captain Ehrlich is not a fanatic. He is a sailor. His loyalty is to his ship, not to any regime. As he evades British destroyers and fuel shortages, his crew begins to crumble under exhaustion and doubt. The film captures the exact logistical nightmare faced by real German merchant raiders. Every decision meant risking starvation or capture. Every storm felt like a battle. Behind the scenes, the production was chaos. Director John Farrow insisted on shooting real ocean sequences off Hawaii. The studio demanded glamour and romance. Farrow gave them rust and fear instead. Wayne nearly drowned during one storm scene when a lifeboat rope snapped. Lana Turner, who played the woman trapped aboard the ship, refused to reshoot drenched scenes because the water temperature caused hypothermia. Censors worried the movie was too sympathetic toward Germans and delayed its release. The U.S. Navy also protested the use of its ships in chase scenes that blurred the moral lines of World War II storytelling. Yet over time, historians recognized The Sea Chase for what it was: a study of isolation, command guilt, and the slow erosion of discipline at sea. Its legacy is quiet but enduring. It stands as an early Hollywood attempt to portray the Battle of the Atlantic not as a patriotic adventure, but as a survival story. One where every wave hides despair and every escape feels like a slow death postponed. Number 8. Morning Departure. 1950. Morning Departure was Britain's underwater requiem. Released just 5 years after the war, it dramatized a fictional submarine accident, but historians saw the truth beneath the story. It was modeled directly on the loss of HMS Thetis, a real disaster in which 41 men drowned during sea trials in 1939. The film follows a Royal Navy submarine trapped on the ocean floor after striking a mine. The crew faces dwindling oxygen and the slow collapse of hope. Unlike most war movies, it has no enemy. The killer is pressure. The villain is time. It captured the suffocating psychological realism of men awaiting either rescue or burial at sea. John Mills delivers one of his most haunting performances as the calm, commanding officer holding discipline together while despair eats through the crew. Historians call it frighteningly accurate because the set was built to true dimensions and flooded for real takes. The actors had to memorize breathing sequences so they would not inhale water. The claustrophobia was not simulated. It was lived. Behind the camera, director Roy Ward Baker clashed with censors who demanded a less tragic ending. The Admiralty argued that showing mass death so soon after the war would damage recruitment. Baker refused. He wanted audiences to feel what sailors truly feared: the slow darkness of drowning while still alive. Morning Departure was not a commercial success, but it became a training film in naval academies for its psychological insight. Veterans who watched it said it captured the soul of submarine warfare better than any battle film ever made. The silence between words, the sound of dripping condensation, and the creak of dying steel spoke louder than gunfire. It remains one of the most devastatingly accurate portrayals of the human cost of the Battle of the Atlantic. Number 7. In Which We Serve. 1942. In Which We Serve was Britain's war cry of endurance. Co-directed by Noel Coward and a young David Lean, it was based on the real destroyer HMS Kelly, which had been sunk during the Battle of Crete. But historians know that nearly every moment of the film reflects the Atlantic convoys and the men who kept them alive. At first, it was government propaganda. a morale booster for a battered nation. Yet Coward, who also starred as Captain Kinross, refused to make it simple. He filled the film with exhaustion, fear, and loss. The narrative begins with the ship sinking and then moves through flashbacks showing the humanity behind command decisions. There are no triumphs, only survival through duty. Filming was brutal. Shell explosions were created using real charges in British shipyards. Sets were soaked for days to keep authenticity. Coward nearly quit when he realized he was directing one of the first wartime features ever filmed during actual air raids. Historians praise its accuracy not just in naval detail, but in emotion. The ship's routines, the watch rotations, the sailor slang, everything came from Royal Navy advisors who served in convoys. Censors feared it might be too grim for home audiences, but Winston Churchill himself ordered it released uncut, calling it essential to morale. The film won international acclaim and became Britain's most important cinematic tribute to its sailors. What makes In Which We Serve historically vital is its emotional truth. It captures what the Battle of the Atlantic meant to a nation held together by salt water and courage. There are no speeches about victory, only tired men singing through tears as their ship burns. For historians, it remains the beating heart of wartime cinema, proof that patriotism can live inside exhaustion and fear. Number 6. The Key. 1958. The Key was not a film about victory. It was about waiting to die. Set during the Battle of the Atlantic, it follows British tugboat captains who rescue damaged ships under constant threat from German submarines and bombers. Every mission feels like suicide. William Holden plays a newly assigned officer who inherits not only a tug, but also a symbolic key to an apartment and the woman who waits inside it. Historians love The Key for its psychological accuracy. It captures the fatalism that haunted the tug crews of the Atlantic convoys. These men were not glamorous heroes, they were ordinary seamen facing impossible odds. The film never romanticizes them. Director Carol Reed shows long silent sequences where the camera stares across an empty gray ocean. The enemy is never seen, only felt. Behind the scenes, Reed fought with Columbia Pictures executives who wanted more romance. They feared American audiences would not connect to the quiet British stoicism, but Reed insisted the film was about guilt, not love. The key itself became a metaphor for mortality. When a captain died, his key would pass to the next man. In production meetings, Reed called it the ghost's handoff, the moment when death chooses its next victim. Holden was nearly fired after refusing to deliver melodramatic dialogue written for test audiences. He demanded realism and reportedly rewrote several scenes himself to match the tone of veterans he had interviewed. Sophia Loren brought rare emotion to her role as the woman who knew each time the door opened it might not be the same man. Historians note that The Key was one of the first films to show the psychological rotation of wartime romance, the exchange of affection between survivors as a way of coping with trauma. It was banned briefly in some countries for moral ambiguity. Yet today it stands as one of the most human portrayals of the Atlantic War, where love and death took turns unlocking the same door. Number 5. Greyhound. 2020. Greyhound brought the Battle of the Atlantic roaring back to modern audiences. Written by and starring Tom Hanks, it condenses an entire convoy campaign into one relentless mission. Historians immediately recognized its commitment to authenticity. Every maneuver, every sonar contact, every coded message came from real naval procedures drawn from C.S. Forrester's novel, The Good Shepherd. The film's pace never slows. For 90 minutes, it is pure command anxiety. Hanks plays Commander Krause, a man leading his first convoy across the Black Pit where no air cover exists. The story unfolds almost in real time. There are no subplots, no rest, only tension. Naval historians praised its precision. Every range call, depth charge pattern, and tactical order matched wartime records. Behind the scenes, production designer David Crank built the destroyer bridge to exact dimensions using blueprints from the U.S. Navy archives. The actors rehearsed with real sonar operators and learned communication protocols from surviving veterans. Hanks refused to dramatize heroism. His captain is frail, human, exhausted, and praying beneath his breath. Censors and studios clashed over distribution. The pandemic forced its release on streaming instead of theaters, which angered Hanks, who had envisioned it as a large-scale naval experience. Still, veterans groups across Britain, Canada, and the U.S. endorsed the film for accuracy. Some said it finally corrected decades of exaggerated submarine duels and Hollywood fireworks. Historians particularly admire the sound design, the rhythmic sonar pings, and engine thrum that mirror real Atlantic combat recordings. The film's final scenes, where Krause prays for the souls of both his men and the enemy, strike deeply. Greyhound reminds audiences that command under pressure is not glory but endurance. Its realism lies not in explosions, but in the quiet repetition of duty. Greyhound may be new, but historians already rank it among the most accurate portrayals of the Battle of the Atlantic because it strips away ego and reveals the cold, precise horror of command decisions made between radar blips. Number 4. The Long Voyage Home, 1940. Before the Battle of the Atlantic had even reached its height, John Ford made The Long Voyage Home. It was filmed while the war was still young, yet historians call it prophetic. Based on Eugene O'Neill's sea plays, it follows a merchant ship caught between neutrality and war as the Atlantic grows darker with danger. The film is a masterpiece of atmosphere. It is drenched in fog, sweat, and foreboding. The sailors are not soldiers, but working men delivering cargo through minefields and U-boats. John Wayne gives one of his earliest serious performances as a Swedish seaman dreaming of home. Every port they reach feels like a ghost town. Every departure feels like farewell. Ford shot it in shadow and silhouette using deep focus and stark lighting that made the ship itself a coffin. Historians revere it because it captured convoy life before most audiences even knew such missions existed. Real sailors consulted on the script, and much of the nautical dialogue came directly from dockside interviews. Behind the scenes, Ford fought with producers who wanted adventure. He insisted on sorrow. Cinematographer Greg Toland used lenses so experimental they later influenced Citizen Kane. Actors were ordered to stay aboard the ship set even between takes to maintain claustrophobia. Several nearly quit when seasickness from the motion rig became unbearable. Censors tried to cut scenes showing crew drunkenness and despair, claiming it would demoralize wartime audiences. Ford refused. He argued that truth was the only tribute the dead would understand. Decades later, historians discovered that sailors who saw the film during convoys called it terrifyingly real. The cramped bunks, the foghorns, the endless isolation, it was all there. The Long Voyage Home remains an elegy for the seamen who fought wars not for flags, but for survival. Its accuracy lies in emotion. It knows how loneliness sounds when it echoes through steel. Number 3. Sink the Bismarck, 1960. Sink the Bismarck was the film that finally showed strategy as suspense. It was not about glory, but calculation. Made in the early Cold War years, it told the real story of the Royal Navy's desperate hunt for the German battleship Bismarck in 1941. Historians admire its accuracy because nearly every line of dialogue and map movement came from declassified Admiralty records. The film opens in the nerve center of the British Admiralty, where officers watch tiny ship icons move across a board that could decide the fate of the war. Kenneth More plays Captain Shepard, a fictionalized composite of real staff officers who directed the chase. What makes it powerful is the silence. Orders are whispered, not shouted. Victories are measured in hours gained and lives spared. The production itself was a historical operation. Director Lewis Gilbert worked directly with the Royal Navy, which provided real destroyers, carriers, and the battleship Vanguard to recreate the chase. The film's battle scenes were shot using full-scale ships in the Atlantic rather than miniatures. Crew members served as extras, adding authenticity to maneuvers and communication sequences. Censors demanded the film avoid showing Bismarck's crew as sympathetic, but Gilbert ignored them. He insisted that showing their humanity made the British achievement even greater. This honesty disturbed some audiences at the time, yet historians later praised it as crucial to understanding the real scale of naval warfare. The final confrontation sequence was filmed in icy waters that nearly sank the camera platform. Kenneth Moore suffered frostbite while standing on the bridge but refused to stop filming. The realism was worth it. Veterans who served in the actual operation said it was like watching their memories come alive. Sink the Bismarck stands as the historian's film of choice for the Atlantic campaign because it turns logistics and endurance into drama. It reminds audiences that in war, every button pressed and every bearing plotted carries the weight of a nation. Number 2. The Battle of the River Plate, 1956. The Battle of the River Plate is often overshadowed by louder war films, but historians revere it as one of the most precise reconstructions of an actual naval battle ever made. Directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich. Pressburger, it recounts the hunt for the German pocket battleship Graf Spee during the early months of World War II. The film was shot entirely with the cooperation of the Royal Navy, which provided authentic cruisers to play their wartime counterparts. The portrayal of tactics, communication, and navigation is textbook perfect. Naval historians use it as a teaching aid even today. There are no false heroics or explosions for spectacle. Everything unfolds in the patient, measured rhythm of a real naval encounter. Peter Finch plays Captain Langsdorff of the Graf Spee, not as a villain but as a tragic professional bound by honor. His final act of scuttling his ship to save his crew mirrors reality exactly. Historians note how rare it was in 1950s cinema to show empathy toward the enemy. Powell and Pressburger believe truth required balance, not propaganda. Behind the camera, the filmmakers faced furious resistance from both German and British veterans who feared misrepresentation. They invited them to set consultations. Many survivors were moved to tears watching accurate reenactments of their ships under fire. The production even shot in Montevideo, where the real battle ended, bringing back emotional memories for locals who had seen the burning ship drift into harbor 20 years earlier. Censors in several countries trimmed scenes of death and wreckage, deeming them too real. Yet the uncut version remains hauntingly restrained. The film's closing image of Langsdorff saluting his sinking ship has been cited by historians as one of the most truthful moments in all of war cinema. The Battle of the River Plate endures because it respects history more than spectacle. It captures the strange dignity that sometimes exists even amid destruction, showing that in the Battle of the Atlantic, courage often meant surrendering to fate with grace. Number 1. U-5-71. 2000. When U-5-71 premiered, it was accused of rewriting history, yet over time historians gave it reluctant respect for its depiction of life aboard a submarine. Though its plot about Americans capturing an Enigma machine was fictionalized, its technical detail was frighteningly real. The suffocating heat, the leaking pipes, the metal groaning under pressure all mirrored the true experience of submarine warfare. Matthew McConaughey plays a young officer forced into command after disaster strikes. The film's strength lies not in its action, but in its authenticity of environment. Historians note that its depiction of compartment flooding, torpedo reloads, and emergency dives were so accurate that even retired submariners praised its realism while rejecting its historical liberties. Director Jonathan Mostow built the U-boat interior to exact wartime blueprints using riveted steel instead of film sets. The crew operated in total darkness while hydraulic rigs tilted the set during battle scenes. The claustrophobia was genuine. Actors emerged drenched and trembling after every take. The decision to use real compressed air for torpedo launches added physical violence to the soundscape that viewers still describe as painful. Controversy exploded when British officials protested the film's claim that Americans had captured the Enigma machine. In truth, it was the Royal Navy that had done so. The uproar forced the studio to issue an apology. Yet historians eventually separated the facts from the filmmaking. They acknowledged that while the plot twisted history, the atmosphere portrayed the psychological truth of Atlantic submarine warfare better than most. What makes U-571 remarkable today is its ability to bridge fiction and authenticity. It shows how chaos, fear, and duty blurred together inside steel tubes beneath a merciless ocean. For all its faults, it remains a chillingly realistic recreation of the battle beneath the waves where every breath could be your last. The Battle of the Atlantic was not about heroes, it was about endurance. Every film on this list captured a fragment of that truth through sweat, oil, and silence. History survives because these stories refuse to drown. Which one struck you the hardest? Tell us below. Like, subscribe, and remember the ocean never forgets those who fought it.